So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your presence here and good afternoon. First of all, I will introduce myself. I am Tommaso Della Longa. I'm the communication advisor of the president of the International Federation. Give me the opportunity to thank the UN Office of the Spokesperson for the Secretary General that they host us here today. I'm pleased to introduce on my right, Francesco Rocca, President of the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies and President of the Italian Red Cross. On my left, Richard Blewett, which is the head of the International Federation Delegation to the United Nations here in New York. As some of you will know, the International Federation, the IFRC, is the world's largest humanitarian network made up of 191 national societies all around the world. Our volunteers are present in tens of thousands of communities around the world, including at points along migration routes. On a daily basis, Red Cross volunteers are doing what they can to support or care for vulnerable migrants. They see every day the growing suffering of people. Often, this suffering is the result of increasingly restrictive migration policies. This is what we want to talk about today, together with the report that we will present this afternoon. And you have some copies of the report at the entrance of the room. So I'm pleased to hand over to our president that will have his own statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I'm honored to represent the International Federation. As Tommaso said, it's the world's largest humanitarian network made by 191 national Red Cross and Crescent societies. Thanks to our 12 million volunteers, we are ready to support people in need in every part of the migration trail in country of origin, transit, and destination. We are here during the final round of negotiation of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration to present our new report, where we are calling on governments to remove the barriers that prevent vulnerable migrants from accessing basic services and humanitarian aid. All people, regardless of immigration status, should have access to basic services and humanitarian assistance. There is no need to mistreat people to have proper border control. Preventing access to adequate food, basic health care, and legal advice about their rights is completely unacceptable. Everyone has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. In our report, which is available here and online, the IFRC identifies several factors that prevent vulnerable migrants from accessing the support they need. Such factors range from the overt includes the fear of harassment, arrest, or deportation, to the less obvious, which can include prohibitive costs, cultural and linguistic barriers, and a lack of information about their rights. In addition, in some parts of the world, governments are enacting laws that effectively criminalize humanitarian assistance, including search and rescue and emergency assistance for undocumented migrants. And this is not done only by law, but let me add, because this is, for me, is a humanitarian imperative to underline. It's about even the narrative. How we are assisting in Europe that, for example, NGOs that are saving life in the Mediterranean Sea are identified as the ones who are dealing with the smugglers to facilitate the migration. And this is, again, is unacceptable. I think no one of us, when he's thinking, for example, to the firefighters, will criminalize the firefighters that they are going to save people in a house, and they don't ask for the criminal records when they go to save people in a house when there is a fire in this house. The same, the humanitarian acts are in the sea. They are saving life. They are not making any politics. They are not making any kind of political statement. They are doing what we always do since the humanitarian action exists. Neutrally and impartially, but only focused on saving life. This criminalization of compassion is extremely worrying and could undermine more than a century of humanitarian standards and norms. What's more, the idea that the prospect of basic assistance or search and rescue somehow acts as a pull factor for migration is simply not true. people decide to move for reasons that are much more profound than this. I saw it in my personal experience in the Italian Red Cross, but also in other countries, in West and North Africa, in Middle East, in Central America, in Southeast Asia, and no one is happy to leave his own country, his own community, his own beloved. People are fleeing wars, violence, food insecurity, the consequences of climate change, and our humanitarian imperative is to support them and to advocate to face the root causes, otherwise nothing will never change. We are pleased that in the language of the draft version of the Global Compact, all our positions are present, but we are also deeply worried that the situation on the field is completely disconnected and is getting worse and worse, as we can see in many different scenarios, like, for example, and as I just mentioned, the Mediterranean Sea and in Europe. IFRC is advocating for governments to ensure that their domestic laws, policies, procedures, and practices comply with existing obligations and international law and address the protection and assistance needs for migrants. National Red Cross and Crescent societies are ready to support their authorities to carry out critical humanitarian action. Specifically, the International Federation of Red Cross is calling on states to ensure the National Red Cross and Crescent societies and other humanitarian agencies can provide humanitarian services to migrants irrespective of status and without fear of arrest. Such services might include legal information and advice, information on rights, first aid, basic health care and shelter, and psychosocial support. Create firewalls between public services and immigration enforcement. This involves abolishing rules that require healthcare providers and aid agencies to report on the people they assist to enforcement authorities. Proactively identify and address factors that prevent migrants from accessing essential health services. Ensure that domestic laws, policies, procedures, and practices comply with existing obligations under international law and address the protection and assistance needs of migrants. So I thank you, and if there are questions from your side, I'm pleased to answer. Thank you.
If you can please introduce yourself, then your name and the media outlet, please.
Hello, my name is Shauna McGee from Kyoto News, and on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you very much for holding this timely briefing. You mentioned a lot about Europe, but I'd like to ask about the United States with a recent case with a 1-year-old child who appeared, I believe, in a Phoenix court. How can you weigh in on what's going on in the United States, and what do you hope to achieve in the Global Compact? What is the overall goal that you hope to see realized during this negotiations? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. For me, it is very clear. Family separation is unacceptable. Children must never be separated from their families. I hope that this is only a sad moment in this approach, and there will be an implementation, as has been stated by the U.S. government. As you know, we are not involved in politics. We only care about the humanitarian factor, and for us is a reason of concern, this separation. So I hope that on this I'm enough clear about the fact that we are completely unsatisfied about the current situation, and we hope for an immediate implementation and reunification, and we are ready to work to support the government even for this reunification. But then finally, detention of the children, if we don't accept for the adults, can you imagine if this for the children is something that we can even think about it?
Please.
Yes, thank you, Stefano Vaccara, Radio Radicale in Rome, La Voce di New York. I want to also salute my friend Tommaso Della Longa. That I want to just remind here my colleagues that years ago, maybe it was 7 years ago, He presented a book about migrants with Laura Bastianetto. They co-authored the book about the migrants emergency that everybody then, years later, after the trip of the Pope, everybody started to talk about it. But he came here to present it and to make aware of the situation. But I have a question for the president of the Red Cross. It's an important question that I had it just before. I have every week I come here and ask the same question for several weeks now to the spokesperson or the Secretary General. And the answer is always the same. It's not clear, for me at least. Mm-hmm. I ask this question. Does a country, in this case Italy or any other, or Malta or any other country in Europe, respect international law when it closes the ports to ships, rescue ships, on board, any other ship, that they just rescue migrants, refugees at sea, that they were dying, if they would be dead if they were not rescued, and they close the port. Now, the answer of the spokesperson, the Secretary General, is kind of not clear to me at least. They don't say definitely that the international law is respected or not. So I ask you, as the president of the most important organization for rescuing people, if you think if the international law is respected, and in this conference that you are holding now at the United Nations, if this issue, this particular issue, is being debated, and what is the solution that maybe this conference can have for it?
You're always very clear, Stefano. This is something that I really thank you for. You are so precise in your question, and I would like to be precise the same in answering to you, because you should add a second question. Is it legal to bring them back in Libya? Is it Libya a safe port when you are enlarging? No, I would like to even to open, because the question is not only about the port, no, because of course we are very focused on the port, and from me, we should, the NGO and those who are saving life should have access to the closest and safest port. This is the. So I think that the international, I think EU from one hand, but even the UN should identify. Someone should tell us which is the closest and safest port, because this is the ridiculous part. Because the norm is not saying they must go in Italy or they must go in Malta or in Tunisia or in Libya. The international law said something different. The closest and safest port. Which is the closest and safest port? And then, so this and this, on this I have an answer from my perspective, but no one stated something differently. For me, bring them back in Libya is unsafe. And this must be very clear. So the violation is not very clear when it comes, it should be Malta, France, Italy, Spain, Greece, or Tunisia, or whatever. It's more about, and this is the biggest reason of concern, enlarging in the international water and the search and rescue area, and bring them back in a country which is not safe. Because if it's not safe for the so-called expatriates in these moments, if we perfectly know that there is ongoing conflict, if we perfectly know that one of your colleagues, even today from Avvenire, which is an important newspaper, made an interesting report based on fact that there are hundreds of thousands stuck in terrible and dire condition in the so-called jail, but they are not jail. They are miserable places in which they are stuck for months, used as slaves. This is a matter of fact. So if we call a safe port, this means that the international community is accepting something that for me is unacceptable. This is something that I would like to discuss if I would have an interlocutor on this, especially in a country that didn't sign at the moment the Geneva Convention on the Refugees, on the other hand. So, but this is not up to me, it's the UNHCR to give the proper answer. But again, so I think that your question missed one point. Who has to decide which is the safest port? Second, if it's legal, and I think, no, I just said, I think that I have been clear on this. For me, it's illegal to bring them back in this moment, according to the international law, because Libya is not a safe place for
I have a very short follow-up. Just do you think, because the Secretary General Guterres, we all know he was a former director of UNHCR, so there is no a better person being Secretary General in understanding the issue. So how do you, what do you think about statements, reaction of the Secretary General so far on the issue?
I think that, as usual, he's working hard. I know that he's an hard worker, and I'm sure he's doing our best. The problem is not about the statement. We know that even from our side, sometimes we make the statement, then that we try to be the more polite as is possible, because then there is a work behind the scenes which is very concrete and very important. On the other hand, and we don't want to undermine our dialogue and the efforts to find a concrete solution. So I don't have a real answer. You should have asked to him, not to me, the answer. But I'm sure, and I know, as Gutierrez is a true humanitarian, that he is working hard to find a solution. The problem is how big is the capacity of UN, not of Gutierrez, to implement their own chart. This is a different issue that we are having. Even, for example, talking as a president of the Italian Red Cross, not president of the International Federation, we are having in the EU system, because we have the EU and a EU policy, but then you have all the member states have different policies that many of them do not comply with the EU policy. So this is part of the lack of implementation that we have in this big organization and institution.
Thank you. Mario Villar with Agencia EFE from Spain. On the situation in the Mediterranean, there's been more and more of a debate, and political statements getting tougher and tougher in many countries, like Italy, for example. What's your reaction, and what are the consequences that you think this can have for the migrants that are in danger in the Mediterranean?
So, if I understood correctly, but my concern is about the narrative. You know, as I said, there is a criminalization of the migrants and of those who are working hard supporting them. And on this, I didn't listen in the recent months, or let me tell you, years, not only as a motto, sometime to implement the capacity of the so-called Western countries to support the development of the countries from which many of the migrants come from, and are still addressing the root of the migrants as an emergency and not as a matter of fact. And this is another aspect. As I stated several times, I started to be a volunteer in 1988, working in Rome with the refugees and migrants coming from the Horn of Africa. After 30 years, we are still receiving migrants coming from Eritrea and Somalia and the Horn of Africa. So this is the emblem of the failure on addressing these politics as an emergency, because then there is can you imagine how did it cost? No? And the same effort could be spent in the country of origin. Maybe in these days we are celebrating, we hope, the peace between the two countries, but it was thanks to the efforts of the two countries, not to the thanks. We cannot thank anyone else. So on this, my concern is that the political approach on this is feeding the xenophobia, it's feeding the extremism, is feeding this violent reaction that unfortunately is growing in Europe and is growing and growing. So there is this lack of moral responsibility in addressing, and even in the linguistically talking, in wording the statement that the politicians made sometime. And that the civil society is very divided in this moment. It's really something. It's an issue that is very difficult also to touch every time in the social media. When even as a humanitarian organization we try to deal with this, we receive immediately tens and hundreds and sometimes thousands of insults. This is very overreacting on this. Even when the Pope made some humanitarian statements, so you can see how the civil society has changed from this kind of reaction. Maybe Stefano Vaccara, I remember, 3 years ago, the civil society in Europe was in 2014 and 15 celebrating the humanitarian response, the humanitarian solidarity. How our society has changed in the last 3 years. It's something so difficult to understand. But of course, it's been maybe one of the causes this kind of wording, that used by the politicians everywhere, not only in Europe, because here it's a global issue. This is something that I would like to remember, that it's not only about Europe, but it's something that is...
Thank you very much for this press briefing. My name is Abadi from the paper Le Dossier. I have 2 questions. Your report is titled New World Order. Whom is it directed to? Do you name the continent and the countries that erect walls? And second, in addition to the legal and security aspect of migration, do you believe that there are also moral aspects to the issue? And do you deal with them in the report? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. When we thought about the title, we didn't honestly think only about the physical wall, but it's about the narrative. It's not only about what is happening in some at some border in Europe, in America, or in other countries. But it's because this is only what you can see. It's very visible. But the reality is something more complex that we have, which we have to deal on a daily basis as a volunteer organization. And in this kind of wall that is separating human being from human being, that is the reason of concern from a humanitarian. We bring the humanitarian perspective on the discussion. We are not so. First, it's about our principle. We are neutral and impartial, so we don't be involved in politics. We don't have the ambition to be involved also. The problem is to bring the humanitarian perspective in the political discussion. We respect the need for every country to protect their own security and their own border. We don't question this. We are asking to the government how you are dealing with the human beings, which is now related to the migrants, but we are dealing with those who are in vulnerable condition. So we are talking about vulnerabilities. And when we see that this is coming from a political debate to a humanitarian debate, when people is discriminated because their legal status, this is become immediately a reason of concern for the humanitarians. This is the approach. It's not about criticism for political decisions. We are critical and we are very vocal when we see the dignity of human beings it put at risk. And I'm very vocal. This is how I'm always been very vocal. And I think that this is also one of the reasons I've been elected as a president to deal with this increasing number of reasons of concern about the dignity of the human beings. But it's only about this. So we are never neutral and impartial when the dignity of the human being is at risk. This is my answer.
Thank you. Maria Hrenova, TASS News Agency. My question is about Syria. Could you give us some details of which work is done now by your organization in Syria, as Syrian government repeatedly calls for some humanitarian aid to Syrian people, especially in South Syria. Does the situation in South Syria permit to Red Cross workers to come there to provide humanitarian assistance? Thank you. Thank
you very much. the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, our sister national society in Syria, is the first implementing partner of the United Nations system all over the country. Let me add that the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, even in the recent days, have delivered a lot of convoys that reached the affected area in Daraya and Syrian area. Of course, in the area in conflict area, it's always very difficult. But I can assure you, because I've visited Syria since the beginning of the conflict several times, that the work of the volunteers of the Syrian Arab Red Crescent is terrific. Something that I have never seen in other parts of the world. It's something that they are very dedicated and they work in a really terrible condition, but they are doing their best. Are millions the people that every year are assisted by the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and we lost tens of people, tens of volunteers and staff on the line of duty since the beginning of the conflict. So then, if you want maybe more detail, I can provide you the numbers and the figures immediately after. But the response is huge and continue to be, and it will, of course.
Thank you. Naufal Hari, Moroccan News Agency. My question is related to the Global Compact on Migration. I mean, you coincided the release of your report with the final round of negotiations here. So what's your take on that compact? Do you think it's something that's going to help on the long run, or do you think something more needs to be done? You also mentioned earlier that there is a disconnect with what's going on negotiations here, what's going on the ground. So if you can elaborate a little bit more, please.
Yes. It's for the humanitarian perspective, the problem is always to be, to be optimistic, and to maintain the optimism in approaching the life and dealing with the. So we are the first to be disconnected sometime. But seriously talking, we are really satisfied about this outcome and the draft that so far we have seen. Our concern. It's about, as always has happened in several of these kind of documents. We have seen this in several occasions. The concern is it's about the implementation. So let's hope that this draft will be adopted, if I remember correctly, in your country in December. And this is something that we will celebrate, because we celebrate hope. But then it's a hope. No, and then we will work for the implementation on the field. It will be a good base for all the national society, talking from the Red Cross, Red Crescent perspective, to engage the governments in a dialogue at national level, at domestic level, to enforce the law according to the Global Compact. So there is a reason to be optimistic, but then, of course. As I said, there are several reasons of concern about the daily life of the humanitarian, and particularly the daily life of the migrants and those who are fleeing their country because poverty, because violence, because climate change, and there are several factors that are not properly addressed by those who should.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you about the situation last month with the ship that ended up being accepted in Spain after being rejected in Italy and Malta. Do you think this can be any beginning of a change in what is happening in Europe, or do you think it's more of something symbolic, a gesture from the Spanish government? Thank you.
Honestly, I don't have an answer. I hope that was only a symbolic. If you're talking from the Spanish government to receive the ship as symbolic, or I hope no. There is from the reaction and the activities that I've seen and I know so far from the Spanish Red Cross, there is a a very strong commitment coming from your country. I think that here the problem is not about the symbolic or not. The problem, again, talking from a European perspective, is sharing a burden. It's not acceptable that Greece, Italy, and Spain has to take on their shoulders the entire burden of the pressure coming from the country, and then there is a need to implement it, to have a better dialogue among the countries of the EU. So I don't want to repeat myself, but the reason of concern is very high because it's so far what we have seen it's a failure. Going back to your country, I hope it will continue in case there will be other need. We have seen that is not only about the case in Syria, but it's about in Valencia. Sorry, it's even recently in Barcelona they received another. So it's I had no doubt about the will to support and to share the burden from Spain. Problem is that this one is not the proper solution. It should be addressed in a different form, but there are no tools from the EU side to address this issue.
My name is Aida Tama. I work for Deutsche Welle. I have a question. Mr. Rocca, thank you for the possibility to make some question. I just came from Europe, and it was a lot of political discuss there and deciding about asylum system, a new asylum in Europe. Do you have a comment on this? And they are also talking about building some hotspots or platform or whatever they are calling them in Northern Africa or Western Balkan. I am asking especially about Western Balkans because I want to know what's going on in Bosnia, Serbia, and Albania. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Let me start with the final question. We know perfectly that in Bosnia now there are thousands stranded in Bosnia because, as I said, we are on the field, and the Bosnian Red Cross is on the front line working hard to assist these people. And let me add also that what is happening in Bosnia is again the sign that there is no policy to stop these people, because now they are trying again with the Balkan route. Then no one is talking, but from Central Asia there is another route that those who want to flee are using to reach Europe. So the situation is not easy. And about the debate. Of course, if I understood you are back from Europe.
Yes.
Yes, it depends from Europe, no? Because there are several Europe. So this is let me joke on this with all the respect, but because this is part. The concern is about the growing of xenophobia. The concern is about the negation. There is no.
As the new member of the EU,
every discussion in Europe, unfortunately, seems to me that is not based on evidences. The discussion of political asylum, the discussion about the migration, the discussion about the invasion, the discussion about everything. If you then
about
look
Frontex,
at look at the facts, and so the same with the asylum. In my interpretation, but this is up to the EU to make its own policy. For me, it's the dignity of everyone must be protected. Having said this, of course, it's a matter of fact, again, because we as Italian Red Cross, we received 600,000 migrants in the last 3 years. We are on the docks every day to receive those who are fleeing Africa. And I can say, with no fear to be that someone can prove the opposite, that the vast majority of them don't want to stay in Italy. So this is a European problem. It's not so. Then when someone is recognized as in need of protection, so then I think is really something that the EU should be better addressed. So the Dublino, it should be modified, I think. It's not working the way it's working now.
And on these hotspots?
On the hotspots, honestly, it's a reason of concern because every time that the people I said personally, I'm against the detention of the people. So this is but again here and then I've met the authorities in Niger. And I was impressed by the rational approach that they have. And they told us, you are coming here, I was talking to me as a European in that moment, and not as a president of the International Federation. You are approaching all in terms of security, help us in terms of development. So I think that's to better address and to have center in which we can create finally a humanitarian channel, these are most welcome. If there is a place just to detain people, of course, it's a big reason of concern. So this is but the work, for example, in Niger is huge, is immense. I visited in Agadez, the centers, and the work that is done not only by the Red Cross, the IOM, UNHCR, all working together. The head of UNHCR in Niger she's a friend of mine. She's doing an exceptional job there. So but the hotspot is not the right answer. We are not working even in Italy as Italian Red Cross in the hotspot that were created by the government because we don't want to be involved in detention of people that didn't commit a crime. Because this is another fact. Detaining people that didn't commit any crime.
Hi, I'm from News Agency of Nigeria, Prudence. Please, I want to ask, what are you doing? I'm here. Yeah, what intervention are you carrying out in northeast Nigeria, where Boko Haram attack is very rampant? And are you also in any negotiation with the Nigerian government to secure the release of the abducted Chibok schoolgirls and also the Dapchi schoolgirls?
This is part of the work, the huge work that our colleagues and friends of the International Committee of the Red Cross are doing so far. I think that they can better brief you about this kind of negotiation and work. I know only, and this is my part, that they are working hard and closely with the Nigerian Red Cross Society, which is doing his part in close cooperation with them, and so this is the only answer that I can do. I don't want to overlap my role with their role in this kind of negotiation in this very delicate area on which there are hundreds of thousands. This is another. I want to use your question just to give another example. These are one of in the so-called Western countries, one of the many forgotten crises for many people who is fleeing that area because the violence and the presence of this conflict and hard violence in the area. So and many are those who are reaching the Italian and European coast, and so. For your question, I think the better interlocutor is the ICRC. On the other hand, I thank you for the question because you remind me one of the causes that was often forgotten by the European politicians.
Any other question? Okay, so before closing, I would like to give the floor to our head of delegation.
This is just to mention that we will run a side event with the United Nations Human Rights Body and the Platform for International Cooperation for Undocumented Migrants. The title of the event is How to Meet the Needs of Migrants Without Sacrificing Security and Sovereignty. It's this evening, 6:30 to 7:45 in Conference Room 11. And of course, we would like to have the press there and anybody else who might be able to attend. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. And then if you need any other information, I know that on our press release there are our numbers, also my numbers. So we are still here in New York till Thursday. Thank you very much.